Set up Web Application Proxy, or WAP. Hey everyone, Ben Finkel here, and in this nugget, we're going to walk through the final step to getting our ADFS federated authentication set up and in place, and that is, we're going to install our Web Application Proxy server, configure it appropriately, and then convert our domain from a standard domain to a federated domain. So here I am on my server that's going to serve as my WAP, Web Application Proxy server. It is located in the DMZ so that it has external access to the public internet, or rather, the public internet can reference it by a publicly visible IP address. I need to install the WAP service. I'm going to add roles and features from the Server Manager dashboard. It's very easy to install WAP. It's found under the server role of remote access. You see that right down here. I know it doesn't say WAP, it says remote access, but when we select remote access on the menu, what's going to happen is we are going to get a remote access, there it is, remote access and role services option added to our task list inside of this add roles and features wizard. So as we scroll down past the features, we're now in the remote access configuration, and we can choose, there it is, Web Application Proxy. So we'll select that. It's going to warn us about additional features that are required for Web Application Proxy. That's fine. I'll select Add Features there, let it install those. Click Next. This also, similar to ADFS role, has an export configuration settings. If you select that, it will give you a .xml file, and you see in the tooltip here, it even tells me, oops, went away. If I use install-Windows feature, I can pass in the configuration file path parameter, and I can hand it the XML file that this produces, and that XML file will perform this exact same role installation. So if I need to build additional WAP servers, I can download the configuration file and use it to build the exact same configuration that I'm doing here. I'm just going to click Install and let the wizard finish installing WAP. Now with the role installed, I have a couple of configuration steps to perform. First, I need to get that certificate, the SSL certificate that I used on my ADFS server, installed on this server as well. And I've placed that down here in my Documents folder. So I can simply double-click it. Make sure to install it on the local machine, not on the current user. And I want to ensure that it gets placed into the Personal Certificate Store. That's where it belongs. So I can click Browse here, choose Personal, and click Next. That should install that certificate for me. The import was successful. Great. The next thing that you need to do is you need to ensure that you can resolve the adfs.cbtoffice.com domain name. Remember, that was the domain name that we gave to the Federation service when we installed ADFS in our setting up ADFS nugget. It's the domain name that that certificate that I just installed uses. Well, this server needs to be able to find that domain name. Now to that end, what I've done is on the DNS server that I'm running inside of my little local network here, that happens to be the ADFS machine as well, but that's not important. I've added a forward lookup zone for adfs.cbtoffice.com, and if we take a look at that forward lookup zone, we can see that it has an A record pointing to 192.168.1.102. I want to stress that this is my internal DNS. This is how internal machines, specifically the Web Application Proxy server, is going to resolve that DNS name. It will resolve it back to the server, the ADFS server, on my ADFS farm. If you don't want to mess about with your own internal DNS server, you know what you could do? You could set up this this resolution in the hosts file on the WAP server as well. But you know, configuring your own DNS server, that's probably the more enterprise way to do it. But certainly both would work as long as the WAP server can resolve this domain name back to the ADFS farm. And the reason I stress that is because in a minute we're going to have to configure this domain name on our public DNS, and we're going to do it a little bit differently. Now back here on my WAP server, if you want to test that resolution, you can launch a command prompt and just run ns lookup adfs.cbtoffice.com, and yeah, I can see that it is in fact resolving to the appropriate IP address 1.102. Great, now that we are resolving and we've got our certificate installed, we can come to our server manager, find remote access, right click and choose the remote access management utility. And this is how I'm going to configure my WAP server. So this is sort of the second step. Just like ADFS had to be installed and then configured, well, WAP also has to be installed and now configured. On the left hand side here, I'll select Web Application Proxy, and I'm going to run the wizard to set it up. It's very, very simple. I need to set up my Federation service name. That's the adfs-cbtoffice.com name that I used for my ADFS service, and it's used inside of that certificate. We'll see that in a second. I also need the credentials of a local administrator account on the Federation servers. This is not emphatically the service account that we set up for the ADFS service. This is a local admin account on whatever server is running ADFS. And for the purposes of this nugget, I'm going to use my global administrator in the domain. Obviously not a great idea. You probably want to set up a specific account for this purpose, but not a big problem here. Now I need to select the certificate that I want to use, and I'm going to pull down my adfs.cbtoffice.com certificate. Obviously, if you didn't install this certificate, it wouldn't be available here to select, so make sure that you've installed it first. Finally, we will get a confirmation page, which includes a nice PowerShell command that we could use to perform the exact same installation configuration that we just did. So once again, it's great if you're going to set up multiple servers to run your WAP service. Run the first one through the GUI, get the commands, get the configuration file, get this PowerShell command, and then any additional servers, you can just paste these right into your PowerShell window and install the service that way. I'll click Configure, wait for this to finish, and when it's done, our WAP server will be up and running. There, that was easy enough. It has been configured successfully. If I click Close here, it's going to load the configuration for me, and hopefully I will see... There we go. If I select Operation Status on the left, everything is green check marks and working properly. Awesome. Now, the final couple of steps that we need to perform. First, I talked about the public resolution of that federation service, adfs.cbtoffice.com. Internally, it's resolving to my ADFS server, but I want the wider public, I want the world, the Office 365 service in particular, to resolve that to my WAP IP address. So I need to set up a public DNS record, and if you recall, we set up for the cbtoffice.com domain, public IP address records are being hosted inside of portal.office.com. So here under my Office account, I can launch the admin panel. Scroll down to the settings and choose domains, and there is cbtoffice.com. If I select that and expand DNS settings, I've got all the DNS settings for the different services, the different things that I need. Well, I need a custom record. New custom record. Specifically, I need an A record so that the hostname adfs.cbtoffice.com resolves to my external IP address for that WAP server, which is that right there. So I will resolve that for public services, namely Office 365, but really any other service that I want to enable ADFS authentication for, is going to resolve adfs.cbtoffice.com to the public address of my WAP service. My WAP service in turn is going to forward those requests onto the ADFS service that is not in the DMZ, that is in my locally protected network. As a final but very important step, we need to convert the cbtoffice.com domain from what's called a standard domain into a federated domain. So we have to tell Office 365 that users who want to log in to cbtoffice.com are going to use this ADFS server in order to do so. And that's actually really, really easy to do. I've loaded up Windows PowerShell here on the ADFS server, and it's very important, I want to stress this, that you run this command here from your ADFS server. You can't run it from the WAP server, you can't run it from your client desktop. I'm loaded on my ADFS server. I've downloaded the Azure Active Directory PowerShell module. I have connected to my MSOL service. If you don't know what I'm talking about, check out my nugget on setting up PowerShell for use with Office 365. And the last command that I need to run is a very simple convert -msol domain to federated. Notice there's two of them here, convert domain to federated and convert domain to standard. Then actually if we look below that, you can convert individual users, but when I convert the domain, it's going to go find every user that has cbtoffice.com as the domain and convert each of those users for me. It's really nice. All I have to pass in is the domain name that I want to convert, and as long as I'm running this from the appropriate ADFS server, this will just take a moment and it will convert that domain from standard to federated. There we go, successfully updated. A neat way that I can check that, watch when I call get-msol domain, it's going to list all my domain names in my MS Online service, and there at the very top, cbtoffice.com is using authentication federated instead of managed. So it is going to federate authentication to the cbtoffice.com domain back to my ADFS deployment. Let's see it in action real quick. I have a simple Windows 10 client desktop here that I've joined to my CBT Nuggets domain. I'm going to log on as test user 1, and once I'm logged on as test user 1, I'm going to open up my web browser and browse to portal.office.com. So the first thing it wants to know is who am I going to log in as. I'll call test user 1 at cbtoffice.com. Oops, I did a 2 there. Let's make it a number 1. And the minute I tab off of this, notice we're taking you to your organization's sign-in page. So it's looking up, hey, where's this user actually got to log in with, and check it out. connecting to adfs.cbtoffice.com. I'm no longer logging in through the portal.office.com interface. I'm now using the test user 1 at cbtoffice.com. Sorry. I'm now using the ADFS interface that we just built, and it is federating authentication back to my on-premise Active Directory server. You can see up there in the address bar, it was hooking up to my ADFS server. The first time I do this, I have to go through some additional steps. It's going to walk me through that, and when it's complete, I will have single sign-on set up for this user. And that concludes our nugget on setting up the WAP, or Web Application Proxy server. So just to recap, the WAP server is the server that handles all of the incoming requests for authentication from the wider internet and then forwards those requests onto our ADFS server. The WAP server has to sit in the DMZ, or the perimeter network, so that external communication can reach it, and it needs to have an internal DNS entry on its internal DNS server that resolves our service name to the ADFS server. That's contrary to the public DNS record that needs to resolve that DNS service name to the WAP server. So public traffic gets routed to the WAP server, the WAP server routes traffic to the ADFS server. Finally, we finished with the convert-msol domain to federated PowerShell commandlet to tell Office 365 to use our new server. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.